Do you ever feel uneasy stepping outside of your comfort zone and trying something new? If so, then this episode is for you. Hi, I'm Jessica Huang, your career transition coach, and welcome to this episode of Permission to Flow. So this past weekend, I was in Wilmington, North Carolina, and outside of what I was planning, my friends and I decided to go surfing. And originally I was kind of like, oh, I don't know, this might not be for me. But after a little bit and kind of being in water again and spending some time, I decided to do it. This episode is really focused on the things that I have kind of acquired over time through all the different things I do that has made me into a better learner and made taking up surfing to be a much more adaptable skill than I thought it would be. So here's the thing I will preface in there's two big things going on here in terms of surfing. So I will say that I definitely went in with translative skills, right? Like I was able to apply a lot of my general athleticism definitely came into play. All the yoga, all the acro yoga, balancing, like all these things definitely benefited me in terms of being able to pick up surfing. But then on the other side of this is that I was going in with, just having no idea like what surfing really took, but B, like I am not the most comfortable person with water. I actually did not think I knew how to swim until the day before we went. Turns out I can swim enough. And also, we were generally in an area that I could stand up in. And so it wasn't really like a strong requirement, honestly, to swim in the case of surfing lessons. But it definitely was something that made me uneasy and hesitate around it. But ultimately I decided that with the instructors, with everyone around, like I would give it a try and see how it goes. And, you can always bail out if I was like, oh God, this isn't working for me. Right. So that's kind of the background of what was going on in my head prior to surfing. But I want to talk through some of the things that really helped me in terms of being able to pick up a new skill, try it on, and ultimately like enjoy the process. So in this episode, I'm going to dive in a little bit into that because ultimately, if you are someone that is looking to make a career change, you usually have to learn new things, right? And I will tell you, especially as an entrepreneur and someone that made a complete 180 on my career, it has required me to pick up a lot of new skills. And it's these things that I'm going to talk about that have been critical in terms of my ability to kind of learn and adjust and keep going. And so I was thinking about how, because of the fact that I am a very, I don't know, fairly skilled in just learning, that it helped me be able to pick up surfing a lot easier and enjoy the process in a way that not everyone does, right? Like I think that whenever we deal with starting learning a new skill, it's often that there can be a lot of fear involved and there can be a lot of frustration. And so I feel like these two elements, the fear and the frustration, can be things that really stop us from wanting to move forward and trying new things. And it's like, to me, I think it's very sad because it's like we don't get to, it's like, what if the thing that you're holding back on trying could be something that you enjoy so deeply? And so I think the more that we allow ourselves to experiment, try new things, and embrace like just the ability to do something different is going to enrich our lives, allow us to who knows, like make complete different changes, like add and enrich our lives in ways that we can't even imagine. So that is really the focus of this episode, is this ability to step outside of our comfort zone, learn something new, and enjoy something that is not something that we've been doing before. In this episode, we are going to focus on 3 ideas. One of them is being able to do little tweaks, is what I call it. Second, we're going to talk about embracing the process. And third, we're going to talk about getting back up again. So the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of little tweaks. This is one of my favorite concepts. It's definitely something that I have had to kind of like take on over time through the podcast, through Instagram posts, through so many different things. It's something that has really, really helped me in terms of being able to try new things and keep going. And so in terms of surfing, every single time, and surfing was very interesting because I will tell you, it's like, I didn't get that many attempts in, if you think about it, right? It's not like every single second I'm like riding another wave. It's like there's a lot of in between time where you're actually like paddling out. And so it's interesting because every single time I would finally get out there, get ready, like be ready to like go and ride a wave, it was like I wanted to get feedback and I wanted to be able to make slight adjustments. So this is what I mean by little tweaks. Is like, I don't think that I'm like, oh, everything that I just did is terrible and like worthless. It's like, okay, I did a thing. This is what worked. This is what might not have. Give me a little bit of feedback and let me try again. Many of us tend to have this kind of like all or nothing, burn it to the ground kind of mentality where it's like, I either did it perfectly or everything is trash, right? And instead, it's like, how can we look at it as like every single effort is important, is teaching us something, is helping us move in the right direction. And I need to make some slight adjustments to get a little bit better. And so whether or not you're learning surfing or a new skill or absolutely anything, I think that this is such an important thing about learning that we need to take into account, is this idea of it's just little adjustments, right? Like what you're already doing is good and it can be a little bit better. And so it's not like, because otherwise we're like flinging ourselves in like all different directions, but it's like, this is good, a little bit better. And I think this is also important because it's like when we get too much feedback, if we have too many things that we're trying to adjust on, then it becomes overwhelming for our brains. Where if I'm like, okay, I need to completely move myself in a completely different direction and I need to do this, that, and the other thing, and like everything is wrong, it's going to overwhelm you, right? And then you like will get frazzled and then like nothing happens. So instead it's like, okay, let me focus in on one thing that I want to adjust every single time instead of trying to like fix and correct everything. And this just allows us to A, recognize our like current efforts are worthwhile, and B, recognize the fact that like we're not that far off realistically, and not to overwhelm ourselves so that we're just making one adjustment at a time. I will tell you that personally, it's so hard to do this. I am definitely the type of person that likes to try and make a billion changes, and I have like ideas cooking up like in all directions. But what I have found really actually helps me move forward is focusing in on one change at a time. And I know we don't like to do that. We love to be able to like, make a million changes, but realistically, I think to really sustain ourselves and be able to move forward in the best way possible, it does require looking at it as like, it's all just little tweaks, just little adjustments, one at a time, and they eventually add up and get us there. So this was definitely a great kind of thing to think about as I was learning to surf. And so I hope you can apply that in whatever it is that you're doing, because little tweaks it also makes it more sustainable. Because I mean, granted, with surfing, I'm not planning to surf every single weekend. I mean, who knows? Maybe I'll do it more. But with things that you're trying to do, especially on a regular cadence, like let's say, if you're doing content creation or you're doing a podcast or you're painting or whatever, it really is important, like from a longevity standpoint, to not look at it as this all or nothing, not look at it as like, I got to throw everything out the window. Nothing is working. Having this kind of all or nothing mentality is going to really stop you from being able to have that longevity in something, right? If we're too overly focused on perfecting in one, I think I mentioned this in another episode, that we're really thinking of like quantity over quality sometimes, where it's like, how can I just keep myself like moving and iterating and being in that kind of forward motion. And instead of it being like, oh, I'm going like like up and down and like, oh, it's got to be 100% or it's pretty much 0%. It's like we're allowing ourselves to be incrementally moving forward. And I think that this is super important so that it doesn't burn us out too, right? Because if you are telling yourself that like all of your efforts are for nothing and you got to change absolutely everything and throw the kitchen sink at your problem, it makes you feel like, oh, everything I'm doing is a waste of my time and why am I doing it, right? But no, every single little adjustment, every single time that you're trying something again is worthwhile. And it's like allowing that to be part of the process and appreciating that it's part of the process, right? Appreciating like, okay, like I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to learn from every single attempt that I make. And maybe it's just a little bit every single time. All right. So that was my little spiel on little tweaks. So now let's dive into the next point, which is embracing the process. So this one was very interesting, especially in terms of surfing. So as I mentioned, a lot of the time actually was not spent on the actual like riding a wave, right? Which is the like fun part that we want to get to. There's actually a lot more that went into it. And especially on the day that we went, the water was a little choppier. And it was interesting because my friends, some of them had gone 2 years ago and they were like, oh, the waves were so mild that day. Like it was so much easier. And the day that we went was not quite that. The water was kind of rough. I was definitely getting tossed around. I might throw in some video footage of how I was getting thrown around in the waves. But anyway, the point is that with most things, there is some part of it that like you might not enjoy 100%, right? So in terms of surfing, it was like there was definitely a lot of our time that was us trying to get out into where we want to go to like ride a wave in. I could have just been like, oh, I hate this part. Like I'm so frustrated by the waves crashing on me and getting thrown around and feeling like this isn't what I signed up for surfing. Or I could look at it and go, this is part of the process. And also, if you think about little tweaks, I can also think, how can I get better at this part? Right? How can I get better at the part that is kicking my ass right now, as well as the part that is more enjoyable and like what I'm like trying to focus on? So I think it's really important with most things, there are puts and takes, right? Like there's parts of it that we love and there's parts of it that we don't love. And it's like, how can we kind of embrace the whole of the process and see it all as part of what the thing is that we are doing? Because I think that this is something that is true of most things. Like you're not going to love 100% of the process. That's just like not how it works, right? Like in order for me to show up on the podcast, it's like I'm not going to love like certain elements to the production of it, right? But I love this part. I love the recording. I love being able to talk to you in this method. And so it's like I've learned to navigate and figure out how do I make things a little easier and like and embrace the other parts of the process of making this podcast happen in order for me to still do this thing. And so I think that no matter what we're doing, it's like learning to embrace it and almost like it's like how can we embrace learning through the hard parts as well as the thing that we love. One more thing about embracing the process is like sometimes we can have like kind of hold ourselves back because we're holding on to being afraid that we're not good at certain elements or like not wanting to start certain things because we're like, oh, well, I know I'm good at this part, but I don't like this part. And so I don't want to start at all. Right. And so I mentioned at the beginning about fear. Fear is something that, that holds us back often a lot of the time because we might have some, like for instance, I could say when you look at how I was like, well, I know I'm like pretty physically fit. So theoretically I can do this, but then I have my fear of the water. And it's like, how can I navigate that? Right. So like when I was concerned about that, I was like, well, let me get into water. Let me get acclimated with it. Let me figure out like what would make me feel safer around it in order for me to step forward with it. And so another example with like the podcast is that I was like, okay, I think I can manage talking on the camera, but how do I feel about all the production work and like navigating all that? And so it's like, I had to like test a little bit of that out and see how I felt about it. But the thing is like, sometimes you have to just try things on, right? And I was talking to my friend while I was away, and something that kind of spurred into my mind is like this idea of like, what is success? And to me, success is actually having the freedom to experiment. Like experimentation is freedom and succeeding in and of itself. So it doesn't matter if you're actually become the best. It doesn't matter if I became the best surfer. It didn't matter if I became the best podcaster or whatever the case may be. But just the ability to experiment and play around with it and give it a shot is already succeeding. And so I think that is something that is really important is it's like, how can we embrace that process of I'm just giving it a try and seeing how it feels and not feeling like this needs to be a forever thing or like if I try this thing like I need to do it for all eternity, but instead being like I'm just going to test the water. I'm going to toe dip and see what happens. And if I don't like it, I can bail out. As I said, if I was like, if I rode one wave in and then I was like, no, the fear is too much. I can't handle it. I don't like this. I could have stopped. Right. Like I didn't have to continue on. And yes, like you could say like, oh, but you paid for a whole hour session. Like, who cares? Right. Like this was meant for me to be like, I want to try a new thing and have a little fun. So it's like, how can we have more fun with it and embrace the process and make it a smaller thing so that we can get past the things that we might be afraid of and just be in the experimentation of it and trying it on. We've talked about little tweaks, embracing the process. So now I want to talk about getting back up again. And this one is definitely key to the frustration, right? So it's that fear and the frustration, I think, are two of the biggest obstacles around trying new things. But when we talk about frustration, this one is real and I get it. And, I think the embracing the process actually also speaks a lot to the frustration, overcoming that frustration. But how do we keep ourselves to keep getting back up? And with surfing, it was so interesting because I think about like water is such a unpredictable thing, right? Like the waves are gonna crash over you. They're gonna do whatever they want to do. And it was definitely such like a great meditation on literally being in the flow, right? Like flowing with the water. Like how can we, not be fighting with it because it definitely could feel that way sometimes where you're like, oh, like I had to fight the waves every time. And it was like, how can I allow the waves to be doing what they're going to do? And I'm going to navigate that. I think it's so easy to get frustrated when you're doing things like this because it's like, I don't have that much control and like the waves are bigger than I want them to be. Like you can create so much, like so many things that are frustrating, right? That are like out of your control and annoying you. And you're like, well, I wanted to do this, but then this is happening. And like, it's definitely, I think, a great practice and in terms of letting go and just allowing yourself to be in that flow. And I think that this is something that is so important is like it so much of getting back up again is about the story that you're telling yourself. And to me, in order to keep going, in order to pick myself back up, I'm like, it's like like allowing, like, remember, fear is excitement on pause, right? So it's like, how can we lean into the excitement and the enjoyment of like the process and really embracing the fact that like, oh, I like every single time I just gotta get back up and give it another go. And not getting hung up in the like, oh, I'm so bad at this, or I am not and well, really just being in beginner's mind is really, I think, one of the most important things. I have a whole separate episode. It's episode 26 on beginner's mind. So definitely check that one out. But what I will say about it is it's like allowing yourself to be in kind of an openness to the experience and not thinking that you have to be perfect. And I think that this is one of the most important things about being a great learner is just embracing your imperfections and enjoying the process of doing those little tweaks, of getting a little bit better and enjoying that process. And that is what really allows us to keep getting back up again. That is what allows us to not get overly frustrated. And every single time it's like, okay, like that didn't quite work. Let me try it again. Let me do it a little bit differently. Like navigating it from that headspace is going to allow you to be like, okay, this one didn't work. Try it again. Right. And I think that when we feel like we're not improving is something that can really make us be like, well, never mind, like throw this out the window. And to that, I would ask yourself, like, what is improving? Because as we do things like repeatedly, we do just naturally improve from just repetition. And I think that this is something that can really hold us back is that thing of saying like, well, I want to be good on like the first try. And sometimes, yes, that's great. Like it can happen, especially when you do have translative skills, but it's not always going to be that way. Right. And sometimes it's like, how can you laugh about not being great at something? How can you embrace the fact that like you're trying something new and give yourself the credit for that alone? And then go, okay, well, if I keep trying it multiple times, like I'm going to get better at it. So I think it's more of that mentality of embracing the fact that like you might not be the best at day one, but you will improve over time. And seeing like, is this something I even want to improve in? You know, it is just an experiment and like allowing yourself to test it out multiple times in whatever it is that you're doing, and then seeing like, do I like this? Do I not? And if you don't, that's okay. Like try something else, right? I also like to think of it as like, it's interesting because it's like there's so many like related things. And, you know, in terms of like physical activity, right? I personally, I'm doing like yoga, acro yoga, like, you know, but then there's rock climbing and surfing and like skateboarding and snowboarding, you know, there's so many different things. And it's like, you get to figure out which one of those you actually enjoy. You know, if we're talking about creativity, it's like you can paint, you can draw, you can sew, there's so many different methodologies. And so I also like to see it as like, all right, like under this umbrella, here are all these different options. Do any of them speak to me? Do I want to try them out? And allowing yourself to have fun with like testing out different things that are under the same umbrella. And maybe some of those are going to resonate with you, and some of them you're going to be like, God damn, I did not enjoy that. And that's perfectly fine. So to me, around getting back up again, it's like, all right, maybe the tweak is actually that you like want to try a different type of something in that umbrella, right? That can also be one thing where you're like, okay, I'm going to like shift over here and give that a try. But it's all about allowing ourselves to be in the process and trying again and picking ourselves back up instead of saying like, oh, like none of this is ever going to work and throwing it out the window. It's like, if you have some kind of inclination that you want to try and go in a direction, if you're like, well, I want to do something creative, I don't know what that looks like. Well, maybe it is that like the first one that you pick up is not going to be for you. And you're like, oh, like, what is something that could be more? And really, I would say looking for those translative skills is really helpful at the end of the day. You know, I generally love to do things like I love to work with my hands. So it's like I really like baking, and therefore like pottery came kind of like naturally to me because it's like a similar kind of tactile type of medium, right? And so I would say like for you, it's like asking yourself like, what are the things that I do enjoy, and finding things that like under this umbrella that kind of fit into like things that you naturally are interested in, allows you to kind of enjoy the process more. And the last thing I want to say about getting back up again is in the learning process, you might get knocked around a bit. And, you know, surfing definitely taught me that. I got thrown into the water in so many ways that I definitely swallowed a lot of salt water while I was there. But to me, it's like, how can we kind of know that going in, right? Know that like not everything's going to go perfectly, especially at the very beginning stages, but everyone has to start somewhere. You know, no one like, yes, there are people that are like savants at things, but we all start somewhere. You know, I had to start at episode 1 of my podcast. I had to go through getting thrown into the water in a million different ways in the process of learning to surf. So it's like allowing yourself to know that like, okay, it might be a little rocky at the beginning, but I am going to embrace the fact that that is part of the process. And side note, I was watching the Olympics, and the people that are surfing these intense, massive waves, I'm like, good for them. What an incredible thing to be doing. I cannot imagine it. But, you know, I imagine that some of them they also had to start somewhere. So remember, for everyone that has become like these incredible, amazing Olympians or artists or whatever the case may be, they all had to start somewhere. And so it's like the only way that we're going to find the thing that really suits us, the thing that we really want to grow with, is by embracing the beginning of just learning. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and you're going to take on a new skill or try something different that you haven't done before, and enjoy the process of learning again. Because unlike my former belief that was after I turn like 26, I'll never be able to learn again, I will tell you, I've been learning all kinds of things. And because of all of the thoughts and the things that I've shared in this episode, learning has become one of my absolute favorite things to do. And I'm like constantly picking up new things. Like everyone around me is like, Jess, how do you do so many different things or try all these different things? It's because I just love it. And so I hope that you can find a little more love for being a beginner, of trying something new and enjoying the process. And if you need help with starting off and figuring out what that new skill might be, or embracing that process and moving forward in terms of building your own creative career, then book a free sales call with me. Link is in the show notes, and I would be delighted in helping you on your journey. And thank you so much for tuning into this episode, and I will see you in the next one. Want to create more flow in your life? Go to the description below and sign up for the email list. I'll be sharing more insights and strategies with you, just like the ones you heard today. Remember, the power to create the life you desire resides within you, and I'm here to support you every step of the way. The world needs what you will create.